I have asked myself this question more times than I can count. In the early mornings before the world wakes up, in the quiet hours after a long day, when everything goes still, and the mind finally stops pretending it is busy, I have sat with this question in places where no one could see me, and I have turned it over and over looking for an answer that would make sense. Why couldn't I hold on to her? Not because the love was absent, not because I stopped caring or stopped trying or stopped wanting her in my life. The love was always there, enormous, real. The kind that does not arrive often and does not leave quietly when it goes. So why then? Why, with all of that love still present and still burning inside me, did she still slip away? My name is Fazza, and I think I finally understand the answer. I just wish understanding it had come before I lost her, instead of after. There is a specific kind of heartbreak that does not come from falling out of love. It comes from loving someone completely and still watching it fall apart. From holding on as tightly as you know how and still feeling it slip through. Most people associate losing someone with the fading of feeling, with love turning cold, with two people drifting apart until they become strangers. But that is not what happened here. What happened here was something more complicated and more painful than that. The love never faded, on either side, and yet she still left, and I still could not stop her. And I am left trying to explain to myself and to anyone who will listen how it is possible to love someone with everything you have and still not be enough to make them stay. She came into my life during a period that I can only describe as beautiful in its simplicity. I'd spent so long surrounded by complexity, by expectations and protocols, and a version of myself that had been carefully constructed for the world to see. And then there was her. Uncomplicated in the most healing way. She did not need me to perform, did not need me to be the public version of Fazza that everyone else interacted with. She just needed me to be present, to show up, to be honest. And for a while I was all of those things. For a while the world outside felt far away enough that I could just be a person who loved another person without everything else getting in the way. That period of my life was something I will hold on to forever, regardless of how everything ended, because it was real. More real than most things I have ever experienced. But I was never just a person. That is the truth I kept running from. No matter how much I wanted to exist in that simple space with her, the reality of who I am and what my life requires never stayed outside for long. It always found its way back in. Duty has a way of doing that, of appearing at the exact moment you have almost convinced yourself you can set it down. I was raised with a deep sense of responsibility to my family, to my name, to something larger than my own individual wants and needs. And I do not regret that upbringing. It shaped me into someone I am genuinely proud of being. But it also made it nearly impossible to put one person first in the way that person needed to be put first. And she deserved to be someone's first priority, completely and consistently. Not occasionally, not when everything else allowed for it. Always, the moments I failed her were not dramatic. That is what I keep coming back to. It was not one catastrophic betrayal or one unforgivable decision. It was a pattern, a quiet and consistent pattern of choosing everything else first and trusting that she would still be there when I turned back around. I would be present for a season and then pulled away for one. I would give her my full attention for a stretch of days and then disappear into responsibilities that consumed everything. And every time I returned, I would expect to find things exactly as I had left them. I expected her warmth to be the same, her openness to be the same, her willingness to receive me after the distance as though the distance had not happened. But people are not rooms you can leave and return to and find unchanged. People feel the leaving, and the more they feel it without acknowledgement, the more they begin to quietly rearrange themselves around the space you keep creating. I remember a specific evening. She had been quiet for several days in a way that was different from her usual quiet. Her usual quiet was peaceful, comfortable, the quiet of someone who did not need to fill every moment with words. But this quiet had texture to it. Weight. I noticed it and I told myself I would address it when things settled down a little, when I had more space to give her the kind of conversation she seemed to need. But then something came up, and then something else came up, and by the time I came back to that quiet, it had grown into something I could no longer easily reach inside. I had missed the window, not maliciously, not carelessly in the way of someone who does not care, but carelessly, in the way of someone who kept assuming the window would always be there, and windows close. That is something I learned too late and too painfully. She tried to tell me in her own way. She was never the kind of person to sit across from someone and deliver a list of grievances. She communicated in a different language, in the things she stopped saying as easily as she once said them, in the way her laughter became slightly more careful around me, in the questions she stopped asking because she had grown tired of answers that did not lead anywhere different. I saw all of these things. Some part of me registered every single one of them, but I translated them incorrectly. I told myself she was going through something internal, something that had nothing to do with me, something that would resolve on its own given enough time and space. I was wrong. It had everything to do with me, and the time and space I gave it did not resolve it. It confirmed it. There was also something I could not fully control no matter how hard I tried. The world I live in is not private. My life is not mine alone in the way that ordinary lives are. Things I do and say and feel have a way of becoming visible to people far beyond the ones I intended to share them with. And she was a private person in the deepest sense. She did not want our story to be something other people observed and commented on and formed opinions about. She wanted it to be ours, contained, protected. And I could not always give her that, not because I did not want to, but because some things about the life I was born into cannot be controlled or contained, regardless of how much you want them to be. And watching things she considered deeply personal become subjects of public conversation hurt her in ways I could see clearly but could not fix. The poetry made things worse in a way I genuinely did not anticipate. Poetry has always been my most honest language. When I write, I am not performing. I am not trying to communicate to an audience or build an image. I am simply trying to release something that has no other way out. But when personal feelings become public words, they stop belonging only to the person who wrote them. They get received by everyone, interpreted by everyone. And in one particularly painful instance, my words were received by someone they were not meant for in a way that created a misunderstanding that I could not immediately undo. She saw that unfold, and what she saw was not just a misunderstanding. What she saw was evidence of a world she was constantly competing with for my full presence, a world that always seemed to win. I held on as hard as I knew how. I adjusted things. I made myself more available in ways that required real sacrifice. I became more careful with my words and more intentional with my time. I showed up differently than I had before, and she saw the effort. She acknowledged it. There were moments where I felt us finding something again, a warmth returning that had gone cool, a closeness that had been missing for too long. And in those moments I would feel something close to relief. The belief that we were going to be all right, that the distance had been temporary, and the love that was always there was finally getting the conditions it needed to breathe again. But then life would intervene, and the pattern would begin again. And I would watch her quietly rebuild the walls that had briefly come down. The last real conversation we had stays with me in a way I cannot fully describe. She was not angry. She was calm in a way that was more final than anger ever could have been. She told me that she had never stopped loving me, and I believed her completely because I could hear the truth of it in her voice, even while she said what she said next. She said that love had stopped being the question a long time ago. The question had become whether love alone was enough to justify staying inside something that kept leaving her feeling like she was standing on uncertain ground. And she had finally answered that question for herself, honestly, without self-deception. And the answer was no. Love was not enough on its own, not without the consistency, not without the certainty, not without the feeling of being genuinely chosen in the everyday unremarkable moments that a life is actually made of. I could not argue with her, not because I had no words. I always have words, but because she was right. And arguing with something true is not something I am willing to do when the person in front of me deserves better than that. So I listened, and when she was finished, I told her that I understood, and that I was sorry. Not in the way of someone performing remorse, in the way of someone who finally sees clearly and wishes with everything in him that the clarity had arrived earlier, when it could still have changed something, when there was still time to be different in the ways that would have mattered most to her. Why couldn't I hold on to her? The answer is not simple, but it is honest. I could not hold on to her because holding on requires two hands free. And for too much of the time we were together, I was holding on to too many other things to give her the kind of grip she deserved. Not because I loved her less, but because I had never learned how to let go of everything else long enough to hold only her, and she needed someone who could do that. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but consistently, with genuine intention, and I was not that person for her in the way and at the time that she needed me to be. That is the truth, quiet and painful, and completely mine to carry. If you are holding something precious right now, do not wait until it becomes a lesson to treat it like it matters. Let go of what is filling your hands when what truly deserves them is standing right in front of you. Because love that is real is also love that is fragile, and fragile things do not survive being held carelessly, no matter how much you love them while you are letting them break. If this found something inside you that needed to be found, stay close. There is always more waiting here for you.